It was when they intervened in a planetary siege between the Forax Empire and the Ascendancy. The Forax had just brought down the Ascendancy's planetary shielding when they noticed a powerful pulse originate from a massive structure in the center of the old Ascendancy capital city that spanned far outside of our galaxy borders. They finally cracked the remaining seals around the ancient structure's central console and called out to something. Something came swiftly, as if it had been waiting outside of our celestial home for a very, very long time. For the last millennium, our scientists and the intellectual community noticed that stars began to dim in one particular galaxy. At first, this was treated as coincidental supernovas from old stars, but after more were snuffed out, it was quickly realized that the dimming acted as a huge and powerful wave washing across the neighboring galaxy, with rare moments of slowed progress, as if an obstacle only stemmed and delayed the inevitable. Forax Command could only receive images and some distorted hails before we lost contact with both their invasion fleet and the Ascendancy. It was not long before the entire system that the Ascendancy and the Forax fought hundreds of years over was taken by this overwhelming unknown force. Pictures of massive continent-sized starcraft took over the airwaves of the entire galactic community, as well as stars surrounded by enormous drone swarms seemingly consuming the energy they harnessed. Our people gave it a name tied to our god of chaos, storms, and destruction. Durkai. We all took a collective pause and held our breath-glance moisture sockets as we watched the entire Forax armada descend upon the Durkai outside of its homeworld. Cheers were heard across planets for every Durkai ship fallen by concentrated Forax firepower. But as time went on, a sense of dread and unease washed upon every viewer. We watched as the Durkai wave continued to move unabated. As the Forax fought and fought, the Durkai pressed them back further and further into their planet's atmosphere. The camera footage switched so rapidly due to the craft holding the camera being destroyed that the media opted just to use observation cameras from other systems to watch the battle. The Forax fell within hours after first contact. And like a deadly plague, the Durkai spread amongst the stars within our galaxy. Species have fought them, attempted to speak with them, plead with them, and even defect to the Durkai as long as their world wasn't engulfed as well. But it was all met with silence. The Durkai's massive capital ships, advanced technologies, and evolutionary position perceived us as pigs lined up for a slaughter. As the wave approached, panic reached us first. Sudden evacuations were executed with barely any coordination. Everyone and everything wanted to get away. Like animals, we were chased and pressed against the limits of our own technology. We couldn't get out, and as more worlds fell, millions opted to find alternative ways of escaping this doomed reality. But that's when we noticed another change in the galactic stage. The ancient isolationists, who were older than even the first Galactic Council founder species, started recalling their esteemed tradesmen. Without any additional context, every tradesman approved for access to the galactic community was recalled or had already begun leaving before the recall. The humans were stirring from their long slumber. First came the sudden decloaking of massive Terran warfleets scattered across the entire galaxy. They numbered in the thousands, housing enormous battleships and carrier-like ships. Every time we attempted to scan them for more information, the state-of-the-art scanners had their data scattered, while others just came up with nothing. None of the ships responded to any hails, and even when the fleets were attacked by our more hostile neighbors like the Throk, they just shrugged off the incoming fire as if it was a tiny hatchling patting away at its broodfather. The Terran fleets just decloaked and stood beside the respective homeworlds of Galactic Council members. Second came when a separate pulse from the Terran homeworld of Earth was detected. The Durkai wave just stopped. Then, after some time, large energy spikes were detected in majority of the Durkai ships. Small rips in space tore in front of them, mimicking a slip-space opening. Right before the Durkai ships entered these rips in space-time, at the center of every Terran fleet was a single large bulbous craft that resembled a large egg. The bulbous craft registered a massive energy spike as some Durkai ships were halfway into its ripple. That was when every single ripple instantly snapped close like celestial jaws, splitting about 20% of the known Durkai fleet in literal halves cleanly. The Kaldari finally could decrypt the pulses that brought the Durkai to our galaxy. They recognized that the Ascendancy were radical zealots who believed the Durkai to be their god, and hadn't realized what the structure on their homeworld was built for or who built it. They brute-forced the coding and managed to activate its primary protocol. The first pulse was an all-clear signal and additionally a beacon, a light in the darkness of space that helped the Durkai navigate to our space. Their second pulse was similar but had a separate message. Encoded was galactic common spoken by the Terrans. "Hello again." Another pulse was detected from the main Durkai fleet after the closure of their ripples. Now in galactic common, the Durkai responded. The Durkai Empire respects the pact. Let us leave. That's when a Terran fleet uncloaked outside of what was once the Ascendancy's homeworld. All of our datapads displayed clear views from Terran battleships hovering outside of the large Durkai invasion fleet. A fourth and final pulse was detected before the entire Terran Navy released weapons that our galaxy thought impossible. Thermonuclear warheads strong enough to take the place of stars crashed against the Durkai line, followed up by planet-splitting laser weapons. Hundreds of thousands of fighter craft firing proton missiles that could easily cripple a 4-ax flagship. The rest of the galaxy felt as if two gods were fighting in our backyard. Everyone's backyard. Every spot where Durkai was detected, a Terran fleet lay in wait. All the strikes were carried out by what we can only believe is a war-built advanced AI. The Terrans deployed additional shielding to block the intense radiation cast from the devastating battles. The message was clear on all datapads, TVs, holoscreens, etc. Isolation was the pact. Violation is war. The Durkai attempted to fight back, but the conflict was short and swift. Humanity pushed them back until a trail of bodies and wreckage reached the system of first contact. The Terrans called what they had done and what they will do a crusade. It reached far beyond the limits of our own galaxy and touched our once smothered neighbors, bringing back light to darkness. During this crusade, Terra and its humans changed its previous foreign policies and completely opened their borders out to the rest of the galactic community. What followed is what is described as the Golden Age. Once we reached what the Terrans deemed technological maturity, our fleets were deployed across the universe to lay in wait for the next threat. After their crusade, humanity brought its fleets back into their previous positions and cloaked them. We understand our place now on the grand stage. We protect the universe and the Terrans will protect us. Massive bulkhead doors shudder to life as the reinforced gears the size of small houses turn into one another, dragging them toward an interlocked point. Hundreds of different species of different sizes and ages rush into the stronghold behind the threshold. Human women, children, and their elders mixed in the crowd as they desperately fled within. At a distance, gleams of dense light color the skies. Tracers, pulse discharges, lasers, etc. litter the skies above. Large husks of once powerful and commanding ships that fought above lay dormant below in molten metal pools. Several explosions ahead shake the ground and color everything in shades of orange and occasionally blue. A massive conflict ranges the entirety of this planet, and its guardians fight for every inch. As the sounds of combat and war draw near, a voice pierces through the wails of the innocent fleeing. Fall back. Sector Eden is down. Back to the bunker! A bird-like creature screeched, a large gash across his face, along with several lacerations along its body, signifying how long it's been in the fight. It carried a Council service rifle in its right talon grip. While it calls out to the others, many soldiers of the Galactic Council break ranks and begin to enter the same bulkhead the civilians had done. Over time, the commander noticed that he hadn't seen a particular species pass him to join. After a little more time, he called over the official battle comms net. Terrans, I know you understand Galactic Common. The order is to fall back. This comes from the Sector Defense Commander. A moment of silence comes over the net, and right before he presses the mic again, he notices the remaining bit of the human forces coming over the tall hillside. With them were several remaining Terran hover tanks, a company worth of Terran soldiers, platoons worth of Terran Marines, and a squad of combat medics. A smile forms across the flesh along his beak before falling back into a frown. He noticed the humans stop just at the hill's horizon and began checking their ammo, gear, and the placements of their crew-served weapons. A single Terran followed down the hill and approached the commander. Hey, Tweety, the Terran said. His body looked ravaged by war. Terran armor is known for its insanely dense and protective combat skin plating and firearms that can penetrate mech armor. They are the most elite fighting force of the galaxy, and right now, a Terran looks as if it's been stomped on, cut up with a cheese grater and burnt against a sun. I told you not to call me that anymore. I got promoted. It looks bad, the sector commander said. Yeah, well, you were Tweety in Academy. And you're Sector Commander Tweety now. The Terran laughed, punching the sector commander on the shoulder. What are you doing, Brad? Brad? What are we, Tweet? Fucking professionals, the Terran said, legitimate frustration apparent in his eyes. All right, Smokey. Why aren't you in the stronghold? The sector commander looked straight into the Terran's eyes. He was much bigger than the other Terrans, and he never quite understood where the muscle stopped and the fat began. Hence the name, Smokey. Look, Tweet. The Terran took a deep breath. We aren't going in there, the Terran said while loading a fresh magazine into his rifle. Phew, the sector commander said before being interrupted. We got our kids in there, you got your kids in there, our pops, moms, etc., etc. This is the last stop. We need to either stop them or slow them until my guys can get here. The Terran gestures to the large blast doors of the facility. If we don't at least slow them down, they're gonna bust in those walls and slaughter everyone we loved, drank with, saw grow up, hatch, whatever. They will get here uncontested and have a lot more time to blast cut them open. It happened in Sector Eden. It'll happen here. The sector commander stood in silence. That's if we go in there and just wait for it. We aren't going to do that. We will hold and continue to hold until we get some help, or we are cut down to the last man or woman. The Terran placed his rifle to his chest, which caused it to attach magnetically. He'd put both hands on the sector commander's shoulders. You get yourself in there and prepare. Scrounge up every man and woman they can hold a damn gun and point at that door. Once it closes, you don't fucking open it. The sector commander smirks and nods. I'm not an idiot, Smokey. You understand that this means suicide, right? The sector commander said, a hint of sadness within. Don't know what you're talking about. We are just trying to get some medals. Us Terrans kicked your asses back in the Farathian Wars. This is like a Tuesday for us. The Terran shoved the sector commander towards the heavy bulkheads close to being sealed. Yeah, all right then, Smokey. So I'll see you later, the sector commander said before turning around and walking into the stronghold. He'd turn his head to see the Terran looking back at him. The Terran nodded and turned back towards the others, yelling out, Hey, Lilty, get that tank looking down that The door shut with a heavy clunk. Many mechanisms link and lock into place before settling. The sounds of whimpering and crying behind him became more apparent to the sector commander, and just as he turned away from the bulkhead, he heard a very muffled, Contact front, followed by gunfire and explosions. The sector commander rushed towards the command post within the stronghold, bypassing many of the injured and begging with a one-track mind. When he entered, he immediately ordered the front to be displayed to him. Multiple camera views opened along with a hologram displaying the blue force trackers around. He saw Smokey standing alongside two other Terran Marines, firing their weapons in the distance at the encroaching enemy. With each passing moment, he witnessed Terran after Terran fall to overwhelming firepower. Even while some looked to have their innards pouring from their stomachs, they continued to fight. Combat medics rushed back and forth between downed Terrans, attempting to get the few savable to combatable. The two main battle tanks fired their main gun even as they began to melt from the non-stop engagement. He saw a plasma cannon hit the tank directly, the tank going silent. Terrans rushing into the tank and taking the dead ones out, only to use the tank again. After nearly an hour, he noticed Smokey look into several magazines around him. He'd call out to the rest and they did the same. By this time, the tanks were either destroyed or their barrels melted. Smokey pointed at a wounded Terran and then towards the doors. The sector commander witnessed the Terrans drag the wounded while under fire to the doors. The Terrans placed their wounded against the doors so that they were propped up, handing their rifles, magazines, and grenades to them before standing spread out in front of the doors. Smokey climbed into the tank with the melted barrel and shifted it toward the blast doors. After some time, smoke canisters are fired in front of the tank's turret, pointed at the door. This was followed up by Terrans deploying their own smoke canisters. The overwhelming enemy had just started climbing over the hills, cutting down the remaining Terrans holding the higher ground. The smoke began to bellow and cascade across the entire front of the blast doors, covering every Terran and wounded Terran with it. The sector commander focused on Smokey's commands, and his heart dropped once he heard the last word. Smokey didn't call for a retreat. He wasn't covering their escape back into the stronghold. He yelled out one distinct word that solidified his legacy for years after their world's liberation. Blades! A solid blue-bladed light emanated from a hilt he carried in his one undamaged hand. This was followed by many streams of blue light coming from every standing Terran. And as the enemy flowed into the smoke-covered battlefield, for another hour each light dimmed out but continued to fight. And for another 15 minutes the wounded held off the rest. Help arrived soon after. Before the enemy even had a chance to touch the stronghold's doors, steel fell upon them like rain. Orbital bombardment cannons from the newly arrived Terran fleet completely decimated what little remained of the attacking force. The sector commander finally gave the order to unseal the bulkhead doors. He entered the bloodied battlefield ahead of him, piles of bodies stacked by each fallen Terran, the biggest being near a slumped, larger-than-life Terran, his blade still activated and his hand still tightly held around the hilt. His wife cried beside him, but his son stood. Tears stained his ash-covered face, but he did not weep. His eyes were set aflame, his body posture straightened, and his hands clasped tightly. The sector commander stood next to Smokey's son, speaking after some time. He saved thousands, son. You should be proud. The young Terran looked up at the sector commander, then back at his lying father. I'll save more. The pod shudders and sways with each passing moment. The young Terran looks forward with tight stoicism. Small explosions are muffled against the reinforcement shielding of the pod. As it descends into the madness below, the shakes become more violent and the sounds of combat amplify. His visor stays locked forward as he grits his teeth for the impending impact. Suddenly, he feels his body press slightly upwards into his armor as the pod's engines ignite to slow the descent, followed by another sudden release and impact. The calming, distinct red light turns straight to green. The pod's hatch explodes forward with violent force. The open air equalizes the pressure within the pod and gently pulls him from his position. His rifle unlatches from his chest and falls into his awaiting hands. Ahead of him is absolute chaos. Tracers, explosions, and black and white smoke cover every inch of the massive battlefield. Occasional orange beams of light pierce the dark clouds above, ripping the ground asunder and leaving only charred remains. A small group of Council soldiers in differing states of injury looks at him. The gleam in their eyes, sockets, and visual implants gives off a sense of awe. The Terran steps forward only to be met with a desperate voice. "Look, Almach, the Terrans are here. Please just hang on longer. We'll make it." The Terran turns toward the voice. His visor displays a HUD that detects a reptile-like creature leaning over the body of a long-deceased bipedal ant-like creature. The Terran goes to notify the Council soldier, but immediately gets a red notice. He lifts his rifle and discharges a burst into a leaping Durkai warrior. Its multi-appendage body flops into the ground below, its crooked jaw still agape. The burst perfectly hits it in the unarmored throat gland, which is used to provide fluids that help it digest hardened materials. The gland lines up with a major organ that supplies blood to the brain. The Terran then springs forward, firing several more bursts at a second incoming hostile before rushing to connect with the rest of his squad. The moment the orbital marines of Terra hit landfall, the casualty figures for the Durkai grow exponentially at each drop site. Following their arrival, they move to secure landing zones for the Terran Medical Corps as well as the Terran Armored Corps. This planet was marked as a potential site for a Durkai Queen, and Terra sent Orbital Marine Expeditionary Unit 12 to destroy her. The young Terran finally arrives with his squad. He passes a brief glance, and the Marines quickly form behind him. He activates a comms link. "This is Field Commander Nathan Nitrick. Objective Omega is secured. We are approaching phase line yellow. I need Grizzly deployed in LZ 1012 in 15 minutes. Ready a wing for TRP 10111 and 10112. He nods to his squad of 9 and approaches a massive biological compound that towers high enough to strike a low-orbit vessel. As the squad closes the distance, the fighting becomes more intense. After about half an hour of fighting, they stop at a downed Council mech. Thick lines of superheated plasma are fired from bio-emplacements just ahead of their position, cutting entire platoons in half horizontally. "Valkyrie, this is FC-1. You are cleared hot for TRP 10111 and 10112. Confirmed hot TRP 10111 and 10112. Pickle." The Terran ducks down just as 2 Terran fighters come into view above. 4 objects jettison from below them, and they cut hard to the right, deploying a ring of flares once several biomissiles are fired from one of the tower's many emplacements. One of the biomissiles impacts one of the fighter's engines, and just as the pilot ejects, a long tendril shoots out from the biomass, suffocating the engine and wrapping around the pilot, dragging him back in before the craft crashes in a fiery explosion. The impact of the 4 objects in 2 separate locations is devastating. The initial shockwave causes the downed mech that the Terrans were using for cover to be pushed several meters back before an eardrum-shattering explosion rocks the ground below. The oxygen around the impact sites is dragged toward the center point before erupting into a cascade of flames and destruction, covering half a kilometer right below the tower. All the emplacements deployed to stop the Council Terran advance are caught in the explosion and immediately disintegrated. The young Terran climbs around the mech and watches as the many Durkai warriors burn in heaps of scorned biomass. "Good hit, Valkyrie. Sorry about your loss. We will make them pay for it." The field commander with his squad had only gotten several feet closer to the tower before a terrible shriek brought everyone to their knees, even with sound dampeners installed. Then a sight befell him that he had never witnessed before. Out of every entrance, exit, hole, and cave, every opening from or near the tower, poured out a deep black wave of every Durkai caste known to the Terrans. It was an endless flow that the HUD can't even count. "Grizz, the commander is cut off by the arrival of an entire company's worth of Terran tanks, each firing their high-explosive payload at the encroaching wave of Durkai. Every marine, soldier, fighter, bomber, cruiser, battleship, I don't care. Fire every fucking thing we have at them. The field commander screams into his comms. A barrage of confirmations comes soon after, and every tracer, explosive, bullet, laser, pulse, and rocket is directed at the oncoming wave of Durkai. The ground shakes as if it were a plane in turbulence. The very tectonic plates are being pushed down into the planet's mantle as the entire Terran arsenal is unleashed against the tower and the Durkai. The battlefield between both opposing forces becomes a no-man's land, as there is nowhere to stand without being torn apart by incoming fire. With the firepower came dust, a lot of dust. It didn't take long until the majority of the field was consumed by a thick layer of ash, smoke, and dust. The thermals of each Terran Marine displayed active targets separating from the main group and returning to the now heavily damaged tower. The young Marine yells into his comms net, "Cease fire! Ground forces advance." In a moment, the battery of the tower stops. An eerie silence takes over. Darkness is cast across the ground due to the dust blocking out both sun's rays. The Marines, along with their vehicles, slowly approach. Then the ground rumbles again. The young Terran feels the trembling and contacts through comms. "Ground isn't reading any incoming hostiles on our positions. Status report. We are getting nothing, sir." Switching to penetration scans. "Stand by," a voice responds. "Oh, God, sir, they are—" The comms are interrupted by hundreds of small explosions erupting underneath them. Durkai drillers and warriors pour out from the caves below and immediately swarm the approaching force. The young Terran watches as men and women under his command are instantly swarmed and torn apart. His personal squad struggles to withstand the wave of slaughter. Nearby tanks attempt to fire using anti-personnel weapons, but are soon overwhelmed with Durkai drillers digging into their hulls and killing their crew. He finds himself launched into the air and slammed back onto the ground with a sickening thud. Screams consume the battle space as Council and Terran fight for their lives against the merciless Durkai. One of the warriors leaps onto the young Terran and begins ripping into his exoplating. A long claw pierces one of the weaker plates and into his shoulder. He screams out in agony and forces his rifle into the warrior's gland, firing an entire magazine into the warrior. But as it dies, another grabs hold of his leg and begins dragging him away from his squad. A rock slams against his armored helmet, dazzling him. His HUD shows a rapid drop in blood pressure and a concussion. His vision slowly fades as he is dragged. That's when he hears a familiar voice pierce the sounds of combat. "So the old lady let you join the Marines, huh?" The deep southern voice says. "She didn't have a choice. So I know what I wanted at the bunker." The young Terran responds. There's a light sigh. "It'll kill her if she loses you, boy." "She won't. I'll get out of this," he says confidently. "That's what I said too, bud. I can't have you joining me quite yet. You've got a promise to keep, so I'll give you a hand. Don't waste it. I miss you, Dad. I know, bud. I'm here. Let's save some lives." The voice continues before gently dispersing. After a little time, his eyes shoot open. A surge of adrenaline pumps through his veins as his HUD reads, "Shock complete. Host stable." The Marine quickly lowers his hand to his right hip and detaches his sidearm. Raising it, he fires a few rounds into the Drukai's rear-facing gills. The Drukai yelps and releases him. He quickly takes the initiative, rolls forward, and gets on top of it. He pushes his pistol into the gill and keeps firing until the Drukai collapses. The young Terran shoots up from the collapsed Drukai and fires a few more well-placed rounds into another that is attacking one of his squadmates. He then activates his comms and grabs a familiar hilt on his left hip. "Terrans!" he screams into his microphone. Many of his brothers and sisters turn to him mid-battle. "Bladis!" A blue light sprouts from his hilt. His order is confidently given and heard across the entire battlefield. Within the darkness come several more lines of light. Galactic Council soldiers use each light as a beacon to regroup, and the Terrans use their blades to cut down the attacking Drukai. A new boost of morale racks the fighting force. Screams of terror quickly swap to a declaration of melee combat. Everywhere, the Terrans and Council soldiers begin to fight back the waves, pushing the Drukai back into their newly made cave systems. The dust starts to clear and the suns take back the day. Bodies of Terrans, Council, and Drukai litter the battlefield. There isn't a single inch that isn't covered by a fallen body or blood. The young Terran takes several heavy breaths and places his left hand on his shoulder. A combat medic rushes to him and begins rendering aid. He looks ahead and notices several large bulbous craft ejecting and heading spaceborne from the tower, signifying a Drukai retreat to the stars. Battleship Omaha. "Begin cleanup operations." "Nothing escapes," the Terran says. "Disregard that order, Omaha. Let them pass," another voice says. "What?" I know who you are, Nathan Nitrick, son of Brad Nitrick. This is Admiral Alec. They had just signed a treaty with the Drukai. We have orders to return to the Origin Galaxy. Our work is done here, the confident voice says. The young Terran shoots up and shrugs off the medic. "What do you mean, treaty? When? I've lost so many." You have also saved many. They wouldn't have signed the pact without your assault. It will be explained during your debrief. It's over. We've won. The young Terran falls to his knees in defeat. His blurry eyes look across the battlefield at the many fallen before shutting. He collapses on the floor unconscious, the nearby medic quickly rushing to his aid.